I'm Gary Gatson. I'm the chairman of the board for the Friends of the Dallas Public Library. And there's no greater opportunity or as it relates to the library than to celebrate this 40th anniversary of this magnificent facility. So thank you all for coming. I just want to acknowledge a few people here before I get started. I'll ask all current and former Friends board members to raise your hand. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Great numbers. I'd like to also ask any Friends Advisory Committee members here. All right. Every group is represented. I'd like to recognize and ask all current and former Dallas Public Library staff and librarians to raise your hand. Yeah, that's the biggest group. Yeah. Thank you. I want to take a moment to recognize City Council Member Jesse Moreno, District 2, which this facility is in. We really appreciate him coming out. Thank you. Thank you so much. He has his assistant with him, the City Council liaison, Evelyn Amaya, is also here. She's in the back. She's working, but we're glad to have her here. Thank you so much. And of course, Joe Gadice. I couldn't work with have a greater partner, and we really appreciate her and all the work she's doing for the Dallas Public Library. So let's give her a hand as well. So before I get started, since 1950, is there anyone else that I left out or I should recognize? Okay. Since 1950, it's been the mission of the Friends to do whatever we can to support Dallas's library system and make sure we build a library system that is worthy of this great city. Some of the founding 23 members who founded the Friends in 1950 are Stanley Marcus, Leon Harris, as well as Rabbi Levi Olin. So we are happy that over 70 years has passed and we're still continuing that great work, and they would be very proud to be here to see us all here today. So we're very excited about that. I just want to cover a couple of things that we did during the pandemic. So during COVID, we had a number of accomplishments, and we were working in partnership, of course, with the Dallas Public Library, and I just want to bring those to your attention. We celebrated the opening of 2 new branch libraries, the new Vickery Park Library and the replacement library for Forest Green. We continue, you are very happy about that. We are too. We fulfilled the Friends' promise of renovating the Central Library's 6th floor. Some of you have already had a tour of that. It features updated city, life, education, and work skills division, and it was in time for this 40th anniversary, so we're really excited about that. You know, our advocacy work still continues. We still work with City Hall and have been very successful in supporting the library operating budget. And also, we continue to fund literacy programs for virtual and in person for readers of all ages and all reading levels as well. And lastly, we will continue to fund and support the Dallas Public Library as it relates to all the wonderful work they do on the front line to impact and bridge the educational, digital, economic, as well as the cultural divide. So it's because of the work that you all do, your support, the members of the Friends, and all the supporters across the city that we continue to have a vibrant library, and we can't thank you enough. So give yourselves a hand. Now, I had you to sit down only to give you a chance to get back up and enjoy some refreshments. So the next voice you'll hear will be Dr. Michael Hazel, and he'll introduce the panel and prepare you for the panel discussion, but that's after you have cake and some refreshments. So thank you very much.
I think we'll go ahead and get started. Please enjoy your refreshments. I'm Michael Hazel. I'm going to be moderating the panel today. I'm a local historian, and more than 20 years ago, I was invited to write a history for the 100th anniversary of the Dallas Public Library. And Having always loved libraries, and especially the Dallas Public Library, I was delighted to have the opportunity to learn more about the history of the library. And it's hard to believe that was 20 years ago. It's even harder to believe, of course, that it's been 40 years since this building opened. Before I introduce the panel, I thought I would just give a real quick background. I bet quite a few of you here may remember the previous Central Library at Commerce and Harwood. Yeah, quite a few of you do. Of course, that was actually our second Central Library. It was on the site of the first original Carnegie Library, which opened in 1901. A lovely building architecturally, but within 20, 30 years, it was becoming overcrowded. The roof was leaking. There were various problems. It lasted for 53 years. It was torn down. The books were moved to Union Station while they built the new library, because that was about the only place they could find whose floors were strong enough to support all of those books up in what had been the waiting room, I guess. And the new library, designed by noted Dallas architect George Dahl, opened in 1955. Well, within 15 years, it was out of date. It was crowded, not able to handle some of the new technology that was coming along. And there was no parking. When they designed it, the consultant said, "Yeah, I don't need parking. People will take the streetcar or they'll walk from nearby." Well, that just, of course, did not happen. And it was not working for a lot of reasons. And so at the time, we had a very visionary mayor in J. Eric Johnson. And one of his visions was for a kind of a civic plaza in this area. And he had pretty much masterminded the construction of the new city hall designed by I.M. Pei. And after more complications than I'll go into, they were able to get this site for a new library. And there's a wonderful new exhibit, which is just opened, photographic, in the hallway out there, that the staff has put together, which traces some of the process from the bond proposals, the fundraising, the construction itself, all the things that went into building this building. It was about a 12-year process, really, from the first conceptions until it finally opened. The old Commerce Street Library closed in March 1982, and this opened, well, the dedication was April 18th, less than 6 weeks later, actually, so it's quite an accomplishment. The panelists today represent a lot of Dallas Public Library history. And I'm just going to introduce them, and then I'll ask a few questions to kind of get us started. Down at the end is Dick Waters. He joined the Public Library staff in the spring of 1966, right after completing his Master of Library Science at the University of Washington. He was manager of the Science and Industry Department, which was housed on the mezzanine of that old Commerce Street Library building. He subsequently was the chief of branches, the head of the Central Library, and associate director of public services. When he sent me his bio, he was happy to note that two of the panelists today, Julie Travis and Victor Kralitz, were staff he hired. And their contributions to DPL were and remain outstanding. We'll hear more about those in a minute. With the very able assistance of Anita Decker, he programmed this building that we're celebrating today. And when it opened, it was the largest public library building in the 50 states, which I think is interesting. Dick left DPL in 1985 to pursue library consulting, but he remains an active consultant with about 390 projects spread over 47 states. Sitting next to him is Carol Roark. Carol retired as the manager of this floor in 2011. She worked for Dallas Public Library for 20 years as the archivist, assistant manager, and then the manager for the Texas Dallas History and Archives Division, the Fine Books Division as well. As the manager, she directed department operations, which included such things as material selection, and that's not only books, but manuscripts, photographs, maps, the provision of reference services, which is a big part of the Dallas History Division, outreach and exhibits, and of course collections maintenance. The world went online during Carol's tenure at DPL, and she guided the divisions as they began to digitize collections material and put them online, something, of course, that has greatly facilitated research for scholars everywhere. Carol holds a BA in anthropology from the University of Texas in Austin and an MA in American Studies from TCU, as well as a Master of Library Science from UNT. Her specialties are Texas and regional history, focusing on architecture and photography. She's published 4 books, largely focused on Fort Worth because that's where she lives. And for all those 20 years, she commuted back and forth. And so we were so lucky to entice her here and for her to put up with that commute. But it's given her a broadness and an appreciation for the history of both communities that very few people share. She's also a certified archivist and is a past president of the Society of Southwestern Archivists. Victor Kralis is next to her. He retired from Dallas Public Library in 2013, but continued to volunteer here in several capacities up till the shutdown during the pandemic. He was hired in 1977 as the audiovisual coordinator, and as such was involved in the planning for the AV services both in branches and as this building was being constructed. Serving on the planning committee for the building from the groundbreaking to the dedication was one of the most exciting projects of his long career. And several of these people were involved in opening this building, so I want to be able to talk about all of that. Gail Bialis worked for the Dallas Public Library for 40 years, from 1970 to 2010, in a variety of capacities, finally retiring as the manager of the Texas Center for the Book and Library Gifts. She was hired by legendary library director Lillian Bradshaw. We're going to hear more about Mrs. Bradshaw, I'm sure, and was involved in preparing materials for fundraising for this building, the Central Library Building, in planning the opening ceremonies 40 years ago this month, and in handling local and national publicity surrounding those events, as well as working with the news media. At the time that the library opened, she was the public relations manager. She went on to fill many other positions. And then, on my other side here, far from least, is Julie Travis. Julie was appointed to the job of secretary to the chief of branch services, who happened to be Dick Waters at the other end of the table, on October 16th, 1970, at a salary of $501 a month. And she can verify that because, being the good historian archivist, she still has her old personnel sheet. She left about a year later in August 1971 because she got a federal grant that would pay for her to go to the University of North Texas, where she earned her Master of Library Science. So she returned to DPL as a librarian in November of 1972, rehired by Dick Waters, who was now the chief of the Central Library. And because they were bursting at the seams, they worked on the relocation of about a third of the staff to another location, which is actually 906 Commerce, kind of catty corner from where we are now, which they cleverly called Building B. And the rearrangement of the staff and the materials there that came out of the old Commerce Street building. Sort of a stopgap measure, but they did the best they could. Julie worked briefly at the Hampton, Illinois branch, and then in the film library from 1974 until it closed in 1986. She resigned in 1987 to work in the film industry in California. I didn't know that. That must have been interesting. But she returned to DPL in 1994 in the Fine Arts Department, and where she worked until she retired in 2009. Well, they each submitted questions to kind of get us started, but I also hope that they can ask questions among each other, and that those of you in the audience feel free to ask questions too. Since Dick was so involved in the kind of the building of this structure, I thought it would be interesting to ask him about that process, and particularly the selection of the architecture team, because, of course, as I said, I&P designed the City Hall, and later we had world-renowned architects who designed some of the buildings in the Arts District and all. But this building was designed by Pat Spillman,
Well, it was
primarily.
designed by Fisher and Spillman.
Who were local architects. So tell us a little about them and how they came to be.
A little history for you.
Yeah.
Lillian had a dream of a new central library. And so one way we got to that was we convened a group of experts from around the country to come to Dallas and to visit with us for about 2 or 3 days. And one of them was an assistant librarian of Congress named John Lorenzo. And John used a phrase somewhere in the meeting about a case for change. And that turned out to be the title of the booklet that was published, A Case for Change. Dallas has an unparalleled history of success in passing bond issues. And we passed the first bond issue for the Central Library was $2 or $3 million. That was not obviously nearly enough. And so we waited around our turn and we were ready to proceed to the next step. And Wes Wise was the mayor of Dallas at the time. Adeline Harrison was on the city council. Adeline, until recently, lived in the same building I live in now, but she's no longer with us, unfortunately. But they were not going to fund us, so I went back to Pat and I said, Pat, is there anything that we can do to keep our name and our foot in the pool? I said, how about the next phase of the design development? We'd done the schematic. I said, how about the DDs, the design development phase? So he thought that was a pretty good idea, so he went up to the podium and he said, Mr. Mayor, we'd like to request $500,000, $500,000 to do the next phase of design. And they approved it because we were fearful if we didn't get that sum of money, the project would probably never happen. Well, we got it and it went on. Now, 2 or 3 other things that might interest you. We had a fabulous fundraising project, and Eric Johnson, who was mayor of Dallas and made a $2 million gift, helped us out. But one person we asked for money was Ross Perot, and we were asking for $1 million. Each one of these floors, you'll see on this building, with one exception, had $1 million gift attached to it. And Perot said, yes, I'll give you $1 million if my wife can design the floor. And Lillian said, no, thank you. And so we did not get Ross Perot's $1 million. We did get $2+ million from the estate of Virginia O'Hare for basically this floor. And we were in design and even under construction, as I recall, or at least starting construction. And Gary Henningsman was the assistant city manager for the library at that time. In other words, that's the way the city was organized and probably still is organized. And he said, well, you're not using all that money for that floor, said so you can't use any of it if you're not going to use all of it. So I got together with Pat Spillman and a fellow by the name of Davis, I can't remember his last name, who was a construction manager. And if you're going to build a big building, you want to have a CM, a construction manager. And I said, look, we've got to figure out a way to do this. I said, it's going to be on the 7th floor. I can't just be there by itself. It's got to have supporting structures to hold up the 7th floor. So I went to Henningsman and I said, look, this is $2 million is going to go for all the infrastructure, the columns and things to hold up the 7th floor. So we need that $2 million. He said, okay, we can release the $2 million. So that helped us get over the bridge. So one other thing, Lillian and I, and occasionally Bill Slaughter, who was the associate director for administrative services, we visited 50 different buildings all over the country, both public and academic, and we also visited the Ford Foundation, not to get any money from them. I don't think we ever asked for any money from them, but they had an interior elevator system that delivered materials right to each floor, and that was put into the Dallas Public Library based upon what we saw at the Ford Foundation. So it was a great job, an interesting job, and when we cut the ribbon, it was the largest public library building in the world, certainly in the United States. Then along came Chicago and the Harold Washington Center Library, which is 100,000 square foot bigger than the Dallas Library. And one of my associate consultants, Sam Morrison, was a library commissioner when the Harold Washington Library Center was built. So I know a lot about that library. Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this exhibit that I mentioned does spell out the various bond proposals. There were several of them. Eventually, they provided about $27 million in construction funds. The city was able to obtain about $5 million in federal money. And then former Mayor Eric Johnson agreed to head a solicitation committee for private money and raised about $12 million. So I wanted to ask Gail about his role in this building, and maybe she can even explain what's named for him eventually, and how all that fundraising took place.
Well, Dick has told you some of this already, but Eric Johnson was very personally involved in the fundraising, and in fact, I suspected for a long time he and Mr. Perot were not happy with one another, but I never could prove it. But he was deeply involved, and he would make personal calls on people. I remember Lillian Bradshaw saying at that time there was an ad that was, "When Merrill Lynch talks, everybody listens." And Lillian Bradshaw used to say, "When Eric Johnson talks, everybody listens," because they did. He was very powerful, and he had been a powerful mayor, and he was very well thought of. The founder of Texas Instruments, he carried a lot of weight in the city of Dallas, and so luckily, because of his background, which was intriguing, he really believed in public libraries. He had been a Swedish immigrant. His family were Swedish immigrants. And as I understand it, they had a store in New York and lived over the store. And Eric Johnson felt that he got his education from the public library. He never forgot what it had meant to him and what he believed it could mean to others. And that was the impetus of his drive for fundraising for the library. It was personal, and it was sometimes sad when he was unhappy about someone's reaction, but more often than not, Lillian Bradshaw would come back with her meeting from Eric Johnson and say, "Well, today we sold the 5th floor," or today, which was her way of saying that someone had granted their $1 million. And as Dick said, it was a contribution of $1 million for most of the floors. And this room that we're sitting in was one of the most heavily funded. There was a lot of pride connected with Virginia Lazenby O'Hare's contribution.
Yeah. I'm sure most of you are somewhat familiar with Eric Johnson. He became mayor of Dallas in 1964. And while he was mayor, he was instrumental really in helping to get built a lot of branch libraries. And there's some wonderful, and that was part of Mrs. Bradshaw's great legacy too, was constructing all of these branch libraries in the 1960s. And there's some great pictures of Mayor Johnson at the openings where there was one where there were so many children rushing the doors that he was practically pushed back against the glass, because they were just coming in. But what about the publicity and all for this opening?
Okay. Yeah. I forgot to say that no other library is named for a person except this one, the Eric Johnson Library. And so it was an exception to the rule. But there were certainly reasons for it. In many ways, it was his library. And he later told me that even long after his retirement, he would get calls from people asking him questions or complaining about something at his library. So the publicity effort was a huge national in scope undertaking. There was tremendous interest in the opening of this library. As Dick said, it was at that time the largest public library in the country. Its this sounds unbelievable, but the fact that our catalog was on computer was just unbelievable. And of course, a point of pride for Eric Johnson, since TI was into computers at that point. In fact, I think we had a lot of TI computers. But it was national in scope. There was tremendous news media interest in it. A lot of interviews. I think probably Dick and certainly Lillian Bradshaw and me to some extent did a lot of interviews with the national news media. It's hard to imagine, but it really was a significant achievement as far as the country was concerned. Afterwards, there was a lot of interest, of course, from the library news media, Library Journal. For example, I remember an article for them and for other library journals that was entitled, "On Time and Under Budget, Dallas Builds a New Library." It was a source of great pride.
I can imagine, yeah. Julie, what were you looking forward to most in the new building as a staff member?
Well, I was in Building B. 906 Commerce, which was called the Wholesale Merchants Building. And it had been built in 1926, so it was kind of elderly. And I'm pretty sure it had the last operated elevators. There was Mary, who was delightful, and I don't remember the other lady's name, but they both had some trouble getting the floor and the elevator at the same place.
Aligned.
So it was, but it was an old building and it was not well kept, so we were looking forward to self-operated elevators, clean bathrooms, fewer roaches, fewer mice.
Did you actually have patrons there, or was this more of a
It was
store?
I think the film service was there,
Okay.
and that was the only thing that was open to the public. Everything else was behind the scenes.
I see.
So we had a small storefront office right next to the liquor store.
So at least when you came here, you got to see patrons again and other
Yes.
staff people.
Yes.
And Victor was involved in some of this too. I mean, did it live up to your expectations? What were some of your?
Oh, I thought I was in over my head. All the stuff that you've heard so far, I had to kind of absorb over the course of the first year. I moved to Dallas in '77, and the groundbreaking was 2 months later. And all this stuff had to be memorized and learned. But what was fascinating for me, because I hadn't been involved in the approaches to fundraising, was the actual building of this building. This is an amazing place. I don't think it's easy to appreciate it, but one of the things that was built into this building was the ability to change it. I think we learned that if you build a building in 1901 and then you build another building in 1954 and you need to have another building in 1980, that maybe you need to do something different. And one thing that was brilliant about Fisher and Spillman's vision for this building, I think, was the fact that it's very changeable. The room we're sitting in right now is different from the room that opened in 1982. The floor that we're on right now is different but because the walls can be moved and the electrical system in the floor. I know a little bit too much about, and can't forget, a little bit too much about how this place is put together. And I was sitting on the 6th floor, which I had been to for the first time today. And I looked down and there was this patch of carpet, and I said, that's one of those electrical troughs that has all the stuff that goes through it that allows all the electricity and all the phones and everything to be hooked together. The column over there and the column over there are 28 feet apart. Every single column in this building is 28 feet apart from every other. And that's why when you go into the parking garage, which can't be changed. It is one of the easiest parking lots to use because the spaces are larger. And why are the spaces larger? Because you can only fit so many cars between 28-foot pillars. It's a fascinating building. Is it I.M. Pei's building? No, it's not. Does I.M. Pei's building work better? I'm not so sure. But I'm a private citizen now, and I can say that. The whole process was exhausting. One of the great privileges I had as audiovisual coordinator, that was just the beginning of what I did here over 35 years, but my assistant, Ed Cole, and I spent every single month, and sometimes even longer, taking pictures of the construction. Sometimes a little bit dangerously, but nobody had to know that. I remember standing in the elevator core was up and 8 and 10 feet tall before anything else was built. And it was fascinating to kind of peek through there and take pictures of nothing. It was good. And it provided a history that we still have. Some of the pictures that you see in the exhibit that Adrian so beautifully put together show what the library was like going up. And it took 5 years because it's a complicated building. I can remember people saying to us, well, why isn't that thing up yet? And there's a building over next to the Central Library, and it doesn't have it probably has a name, but it's probably had 5 names since 1982. It went up in like a year and a half. And people, well, if they can put that up in a year and a half, why can't they? Well, because this is a complicated building, and it was built as a library. And the weight on this side of the building is weighted differently from the weight on the other side of the building. And there's just all kinds of wonderful technical things that this building provides. And now through the incredible efforts of the Friends to redo this building since 1998, we've learned so much about the gift that this building has been.
That's great. I thought we might talk just a little bit about the public's response to the building. Do you remember, Gail, some of it?
It was overwhelming. It was truly overwhelming. People were utterly delighted and fascinated by it with all those new electronic gadgets that you use, although we got a few complaints about the disappearance of the card catalog. I'm sure some of us handled some of those complaints. But it was so widely popular that the bus routes in downtown Dallas, they rerouted the buses because of the demand for people to come to the Central Library. It was the new and best thing. Everybody wanted to have their special event here. So there was a lot of interest in meeting rooms, and I cannot imagine a more receptive, loving acceptance of the building, even though they didn't know all the truly wonderful things about it. But those of us who lived in this building came to appreciate the planning. I'm thinking about Dick right now. The planning that had gone into this building made it a really good building to work in, because thought had been put forth about how things would work, and it just worked. And I think the public recognized that.
When I interviewed Dick, when I was writing the book 20 years ago, you told me a story about on opening day, the circulation of people wasn't quite what you had expected. You want to tell that story? You can't anticipate everything, in other words.
We've spent a lot of time thinking about how people would move in and out of the building on the first floor. And so we had this gate system set up, and we thought, boy, this is going to be a whiz-bang. Well, it was a whiz-bang, all right. It whiz-banged right into our face because people did exactly the opposite thing of what we thought we would do. And we had to, within 2 weeks, we had to completely change the interior circulation around the circulation desk so people did what people wanted to do. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and by God, they were going to follow a straight line. They were not going to go around like we thought they would. So that was one
Yeah.
minor change, but an appreciated change, I think.
Yeah, can imagine. Well, Carol, you're the only person on the panel who actually was not working here in '82. You want to tell us what you were doing and how you became aware of the opening of the building? Were you involved at all?
Well, I've already been outed. I'm from
Yeah.
Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was working at the Amon Carter Museum in the photography collection. And as Gail has mentioned, the opening of the Central Dallas Public Library was a big deal. Everybody knew about it, and there was a great deal of buzz outside of Dallas. And so I made plans to come over for the opening. I had to see what it was like. And I was amazed. I was utterly amazed. And I remember just walking through and looking in wonder and thinking how well. Now, mind you, I was working in a building that had been designed by Philip Johnson, and I'm something of an architecture fan. And I thought this building did really very well at what it was doing. I thought they were somewhat less, perhaps, shades of Building B. The art gallery on the fourth gallery was called Gallery 4. And I thought they could have done better with some of the names for things, but
It got better.
what?
It got better.
It got better. Yes, it definitely has gotten better through the years. They've gotten much, much better at it. But I also have to take a little bit of a step back. I realize, because I'm also, although I'm sitting here as Carol, I'm also channeling, and some of you know, Marvin Stone, who worked at the library for many years and was the master of the 7th floor when it opened, and did fine books even before this building opened. And he's told me about 7 or 8 times now that I must tell the story. So I have to put in the counterpoint to what you have heard. And that was that Pep O'Hara, whose name her family had the Dr. Pepper fortune, gave the money to the library system for fine books, period. And now, mind you, this is how Marvin remembers it. And Mrs. Bradshaw, with whom he had a great working relationship, and she was pushing for the new Central Library building, and she saw this huge pot of money, and she thought, I know what we can do with this. And so she said, well, you can have this much for the 7th floor, but the rest of it it's going to be sort of like the down payment on the project. And that was how they started with the public-private fundraising effort that sort of speaks to what you're talking about, the structure to hold up the 7th floor. But Marvin, fine books man till the day he dies, always believes that money was supposed to go to fine books. Okay, Marvin, I've done it.
Well, Marvin has the first nickel he ever made. He still,
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the library managed to build a very fine book collection. And you're
they did.
responsible for some of that, I know.
And that was due in part to a lot, it hadn't really been fleshed out in the old building, but now that they had the space in the new building, there were still a lot of people in the Park Cities who were very interested in the library and in its fine book collection. And there were many wonderful gifts that made possible that collection today.
One of the things about the fine book collection here in Dallas is it's unusual because I worked in several other libraries that had rare book rooms, fine book rooms. There was a focus to the collection here. Mrs. Bradshaw, and working with Marvin and the friends, decided that if you just buy old stuff, you're not building a really good collection. So there was a focus to it. It was the history of the book.
And the history of democracy.
And the history of democracy and printing. And it shows. I mean, we have 2 major rooms on this floor that are dedicated to the Declaration of Independence and the First Folio. There aren't many of the libraries that have that, even though their fine books or rare books collections may be very, 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 very broad. Ours is very, very, very focused and therefore very helpful.
Well, we keep hearing the name of Mrs. Bradshaw. Can we share some stories?
Oh,
In fact, Carol, tell the one that you told earlier that Marvin.
well, yeah, Marvin's, I have notes from a meeting with Marvin. So I should have had him on. But he's, as many of those of you who knew Marvin, he's a very shy person. So he didn't want to be up on a panel, but he did want his voice heard. One story that he told me, and this harkens back to former Mayor J. Eric Johnson and Mrs. Bradshaw taking their dog and pony show out to raise money for the thing, for this building. He said that Mrs. Bradshaw, particularly after the building was built, he said she did not need a telephone to reach City Hall. If you remember Mrs. Bradshaw, she had a strong voice, full of purpose. He said when she wanted to reach somebody at City Hall, she could just turn and face City Hall and speak, and they would hear her. The other great story he told me was about the old building, and there was a terrace room, which was kind of a function space on one of the upper floors, and it leaked. And he said that every time, when she was trying to convince the powers that be in the city to build this building, every time the terrace room would leak, she would call somebody from the media and get them to come and either take a photograph or run some television footage so that they could prove that we needed a new library building. She could not be deterred once she had that. And if you ever knew Mrs. Bradshaw, if she got something in her mind, she wanted to do it, it was going to happen.
What about some of the rest of you?
Well, two things come to mind. One is that Marvin took the rare book collection very personally. And in the old building, when there were stormy nights, and he feared that the electricity might have been knocked out, he would drive to the Central Library in the middle of the night to be sure that the humidifier in the rare book room was still running. He was very dedicated. And when the new building opened, he had some resolve that the new systems put in place would protect the rare books. Lillian Bradshaw did have a loud voice, and I clearly remember being in her office one time when someone had gone to the mayor to complain about a particular book that was in the library that was one of those bad books. Now, I sometimes think we really could use her today because early on in her career, when she had been told she had to remove a book called No Way to Run a Railroad. I have no idea what it's about, but her remark was that they would remove the book over her dead body. And that was kind of how she looked at it. So this person had made the mistake of complaining to the mayor about a particular book in the library, and she said, just put down the phone, he's gonna hear it just fine. And she's literally screamed a remark similar to the dead body remark about removing any books from the library.
That's great.
So if the seventh floor staff looks in the catalog and you find that we have a book, I think it was called Hell of a Way to Run a Railroad or something like that, there is still a copy in the seventh floor collection, and that's why it's there.
Dick or Victor, do you?
Mrs. Bradshaw was in the middle of her career when I came here, and all the groundwork had already been done. But what an impressive person! There are a lot of funny stories that can be told. One of the ones that's most interesting is she knew how to know people. She really did. She would see somebody in the elevator, And this might be a clerk from Building B who had two daughters, and she'd say, "How are Noreen and Jemmy?" And this impressed people because it's a very political, wonderful, kind thing to do. She wasn't always kind, but to get things done, you can't always be really nice, can you? But she had that talent for getting to know people and knowing that it was important to know people and that it was important to know about them and that they worked here and therefore they were important.
I think she was a very shrewd politician.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I lived on the same street that she had lived on, and even after she retired, she'd say, "Well, honey, how's Clayton Avenue doing these days?" She had that ability to pick something special about you and always remember it. When I got to go to library school, it was the year that Mrs. Bradshaw was the president of the American Library Association, and she wrote a letter recommending me. How could they say no?
She was also something of a prophet or a prophetess in that she could see which people were going to become important. For example, and I never figured out how she could do that, but for example, Lee Jackson, I remember when he was a nobody, she decided he was going to be a somebody and she brought him into her circle. And she did that with many people that she saw in them what they were going to become and therefore recruited them to be library supporters. So it was
She
a-
also had, and I knew her only after she'd retired, and she would come up to the Friends office. And she had an uncanny way to have an idea about something that she wanted done, but to make you feel like it was your idea and that you were going to get all the credit for it. And so, of course, you were going to do it. But she could not make her own photocopies. She did not know how to run a Xerox machine.
Am I correct in remembering that at one point she was considered for Librarian of Congress, and she basically said no, she didn't want. She wanted to stay here. Am I right
She
about
did consider it.
Oh.
I remember she asked me how I'd feel about moving to Washington, D.C., and I said it was too far from the cattle ranch because my family operated a cattle ranch. I think she was really flattered by it. But in the end, she told a story about going out in her backyard and looking at the stars, and her heart was here. Her heart.
That's great. I had a note of one other thing that I remember you mentioned to me, Dick, that in the building that when this building opened, they didn't really anticipate heavy use by children. And that changed, and you ended up creating what's a wonderful children's, but you want to tell a little about that?
Children, you said?
Yeah, the children's area.
When the building opened, they didn't think that there would be children using it.
Yeah.
Well, that's not quite true.
Oh, okay.
There was children's services always on the second floor. It just wasn't very much children's services.
Yeah.
We incorrectly thought that this was going to be more of a research-oriented library than the general public library typically is. And so we undersized, to be kind about it, the amount of space for children's services. Subsequently, people with more smarts than myself have improved the space for children's services quite a bit to where I think it compares favorably with just about any library in the country. And there's not a large library that I haven't been to, and most of them I programmed. And so I know a lot about a lot of them. Anticipating a question that might be, would you do anything differently? The one thing that I would do differently is as you probably know, the third floor through the 8th floor has the closed stack area, which takes up about 1/3 of the floor space of each level. And we just put conventional, what we call static shelving in those floors. Now, a little engineering for you. The live load of a library needs to be at minimum 125 pounds per square foot and better 150 pounds per square foot. What does that mean? Well, it means that the tallest building in downtown Dallas probably has a live load of about 75 to 85 pounds per square foot, because a book truck full of books weighs an incredible amount of money. Anyway, what I would have done differently, what we should have done is we should have put what we call compact shelving in all of the book stacks in the 3 through 8th floor. That would in essence double the capacity for books of the library over what it is now, because compact shelving, the shelves move and you open up an aisle in different ways, and but it would have required, you know, beefing up the building to about 225 pounds per square foot on that side of it, which would have been quite expensive. But, you know, hindsight is always perfect, so you can't win them all.
I wonder if any of you out there have questions you'd like to ask the panelists, or memories you'd like to share.
I have one other
Oh,
Lillian
sure.
Bradshaw
Oh, yeah.
remark I'll
Please,
make, and that is, there was a lot of stress involved, as you might imagine, political stress and financial stress, and building a big building like this is a stressful endeavor. And occasionally I could tell that Mrs. Bradshaw was under a lot of stress, and she would disappear. It wasn't to make photocopies, certainly, but I would go looking for her out of concern, and I would find her shelving books. This is a way that she would deal with stress, and she would often arrive early in the library, and I would find her shelving books. It seemed to bring her some sort of peace.
Mary, I don't know what our time frame is here. It's about 5, that's after 5:15. Oh, I'm sorry, please.
I had the great privilege of being very involved with the opening of the library, and it was one of the most exciting things that I've done. But I always have wondered what has happened to all of the space behind, where it was just empty space when the building opened. And it was for the collection to grow. But I wonder now that everything is computerized, how are you utilizing that space?
Well, I haven't been back that part of the buildings in some time, but I suspect there's still an awful lot of books back there. Each floor has basically 3 segments to it. There's the public space, which is the largest amount of space. Then there's the staff workspace, which is the smallest amount of space. And then there's the closed stack area, which is in between, with the closed stack area being probably 4 times the size of the staff space. And then the public space is probably a good 60% of the total floor, maybe 65%. Now, whether the closed stacks are still exclusively closed stacks, that I can't answer. Joe could answer it, or somebody could. She's shaking her head a little bit, I think. But that was the intent at the time.
So, this is all very much reunion time. I'd like to introduce you to the director of the Dallas Public Library. We started in kind of, reunion talk, but if anyone has questions about what's happening now,
Yeah.
Joe's here.
We have made a few changes to the back of the house, especially if you've just visited the 6th floor. We did just about the opposite of how the floor was designed back in the 80s, and we've made about 75% of the floor public space, and the back of the house is very small. We would love to take you back there so you can see it, but the focus of that floor has changed, and we used to have government documents there, and we're no longer actively collecting government documents, because there are other libraries in the area that do that. So, duplicating services is not a smart move for us. But for the other floors, we do have still the limited access shelving. As Julie knows, she's been working on 4th floor and 7th floor, and
And
So this floor is the exact opposite of the 6th floor. You know, almost 80% or 90% of this floor is back of house, and we expanded during the renovation the footprint of the archives and the rare book, and we actually doubled the size of the safe. So that was great, you know? So as every floor was renovated, the changes on the floor reflected the needs of the community at that time. So it's changed as the years have gone on.
But what you did made that possible. What your
Yeah,
original-
exactly.
sorry,
What Dick
Joe.
was saying about the columns and being able to adjust the floors was a lot of forward thinking back then. And I don't know, some of the electrical is not where it's supposed to be.
Well, I think it's a credit to Fisher and Spillman, who were the design architects. Truth to tell, we were hopeful of having some international architect, but the city council thought otherwise, and so we got Fisher and Spillman, and I think that turned out to be a marvelous decision on somebody's part, and they did a superb job. And I think the fact that Joe has been able to move things around here and make it even better library is a tribute to their design, and the fact that it wasn't a cluttered design. There's a lot of open space. And I will put this library up against any library in the United States as far as being responsive to the public needs, being efficient building to operate and to staff. I don't know whether any of you read Mark LeMaster's architectural columns in the Dallas Morning News from time to time, but about 2 years ago, he raved about the new Austin Central Library and how wonderful it is. Well, it is a nice piece of art, but what he didn't say is two things. Number one, there is no way to get on one elevator and go to each floor. You have to change elevators. And number two, to be able to operate the Central Library, they have to close branch libraries 1 or 2 days a week to have enough budget to staff the Central Library as full as it should be. So it's a jewel of a building if you're only looking at architecture. It's a damn disaster if you're looking at good public service.
You should have been walking around at the grand opening with Kirsten and I. We were like, yeah, it's a beautiful building, though. It really is.
There's another beautiful building in the state of Texas that will remain anonymous, but it makes no sense. It
You
is
mean
gorgeous.
that way?
It's south of here, yeah.
I still can't find my way around that building.
And it's
18
just-
years.
And I know people who work there who say, we just can't do anything. This building makes sense. It makes sense. When you get off the elevator and you make a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn, you know that exactly where you are, and you make a right-hand turn, you're going to go to the restrooms, and you
Exactly
make a
right.
left-hand turn, and you can still explore. It's not boring. You can still explore, but the building makes sense.
I think some of us who are here every day, and it's really great to hear from you all, we become blind to the beauty of this building, and hearing this history has been amazing. I know when we have librarians that come and visit from out of town, you know, they just rave and they're like, my God, you're so lucky you get to work in this beautiful building. And I'm like, I'm thinking about the leak and this is not working and that's, you know, all the things that we have to take care of. But really, this is an amazing, beautiful building. And thank you all for coming and sharing today and reminding us about how lucky we are to get to work here.
I think you had at least one more question.
Yeah.
So I know one of the things that the library does is provides public service for individuals just coming in on top of your books.
Mhm.
Do you feel like you get enough support from the city council to be able to run those programs?
We do, actually. This has really been sort of an incredible week for me because I've had one-on-one meetings with 2 council members. And it used to be that we would go be at City Hall every time there was a council meeting. And so you got to interact with them in person. And we haven't had that for 2 years. So we got half of a new council, and we've never met any of them in person. I mean, I've been online with them, but the council members actually reach out, and as a matter of fact, Councilmember Moreno and I met this week, and he's like, I just want to talk about a few things, and tell me about yourself. I just want to get to know you. What's the vision for the library? And I was like, well, never had a council member ask me that before. So that was just fantastic. And then Councilmember Janie Schultz, I had a meeting with her about another topic. And then at the end of that topic, I said, well, I'd like to ask, about another topic. And we just went on. I'm like, I would like to know something about you. And that, again, turned out to be a wonderful conversation. So I think that building these relationships, every single council member that I have spoken to values the library, sees the resource that the library is for the city, and supports it. Now, they also have, 100 other draws to their attention, and fighting for those funds is tough, and they make some tough decisions. Yeah, but they are supportive. Well, and the one thing I will point out is that every budget season we are asked to formulate a reduction. Every department is, but none of our formulations have been accepted, and that's because of T.C. Broadnax and his support of libraries. Now, he doesn't always have a lot of money to share with us, but we always do grand asks, and then some smaller asks, and most of the smaller asks get funded because we know you can't ask for $3 million, but if you ask for, $180,000 for something, you're more likely to get it. So we're strategic that way, but it is his support of the libraries that is key. Mm-hmm.
So what is it gonna take to get back to 7-day-a-week service, and what can we do to help make that happen?
Money. Yeah. Long and short of it, as a matter of fact, I can't remember who I was speaking with that told me that Kim Tolbert, the chief of staff, or no, her title's different now. I don't remember. Number 2 in the city under TC, Kim Tolbert, had spoken to someone recently and told them that the only thing holding us back from more hours is staffing. And it's twofold problem: the money and then hiring. I mean, there's a real deficit in hiring right now. We're having trouble hiring for the vacancies that we have. So even if we had the money, I don't know that we could engage the staff. But that's it. It takes people. Otherwise, we'd be there. And we want to be there. Trust me.
Well, thank you. This was a surprise. Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists. My name is Mary Wolonsky. I'm the Executive Director for Friends of the Dallas Public Library. Thank you all for coming. This was a true collaboration. We had amazing help. Brandon Murray's here from the 7th floor. Adrian did an amazing job with the case and the exhibit. Brandon helped coordinate all of our authors and our panelists. I saw Misty here, and Misty Mayberry's here in the room. Am I missing anyone else from the 7th? The staff that stopped by, thank you all. Make sure you take cake and snacks. And again, thank you. The one thing I'm going to point out is our organization, we're so honored to be able to support the library. I personally am honored to have this opportunity. And if you're not a member of the Friends, or if your membership lapsed, please consider renewing your membership and joining the Friends at any level. It's a $25 commitment. Our membership chair, I forgot Lee is here, our membership chair. If you have any questions, you can talk to her or someone on my staff. And then on your table, I have to have like an advertisement at the end, right? I've got a captive audience. We are having our event, finally, after a 2-year hiatus. There's a little flyer on your table. I'm really happy. We have a great committee working on it. Rather than a single nationally known author, we've decided to go with 4 amazing local authors, which you have all that information. It will be in October, so you have lots of time to plan ahead. It'll be October 20th. So I hope you all take one of these. And again, join the Friends. We're really happy to have had you here today. And thank you all again so much. Thanks.
Well, so good to see you. I had a good